Today we're going to be talking about how to use feedback to make you more in demand. Using feedback is a ridiculously easy way to level up your grades, to improve your job search results, and to get promoted faster. Hi, I'm Ashley, the MBA Coach, and on this channel we make videos dedicated to helping you get more out of the time and the money that you're spending on your MBA. What we're going to do in this video is I'm going to start by talking about what makes high quality feedback. Then I'm going to talk about how to get it and how to use it as you apply it to getting higher grades, improving your job search results, and getting promoted faster. So what is high quality feedback? I'm going to describe two scenarios. Scenario one, this kid takes 100 ground balls, does 100 reps, he's getting lots of practice at it. Scenario two is going to start out with this kid gets a coach who shows him the positioning, shows him the footwork, shows him how to position his body, how to throw to first. And then what happens is the coach says, okay, now go do 10 reps. The kid does 10 reps, the coach is watching, comes back and says, okay, so you're getting there, but your footwork's a little bit off here, and this other positioning aspect of what you're doing is a little bit off. And then the kid goes and does another 10 reps. And you see what's happening here. So we iterate that cycle of feedback and reps another 3-4 times. So this kid does 50 reps in total, whereas the first one did 100. I guarantee you that the kid who did the 50 reps with coaching, with tweaking, with feedback is going to be way ahead of the kid who just did 100 reps, even though they did twice as many. When it comes to feedback, we want feedback that distinguishes what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. I guess that's not really rocket science, but that's one of the key aspects to it. The second part of it is that you have to put in the reps associated with that feedback. You can get all the feedback you want, but if you're not practicing that, if you're not putting it into effect, then it's really not got a lot of value for you. The final aspect, and you probably picked this up as well, is that the coach was focusing on the things that the kid was doing wrong, complimenting and supporting on what the kid was doing right, but focus the time and the feedback on the stuff that was being done wrong that could be done better. There's so many times we've seen people, or maybe even done it ourselves, where we're studying something and we know 3/4 of the material and don't really know 1/4 of it really well, but we review the whole thing. And we wasted 3/4 of that time on stuff we already knew and could have done in our sleep. So now let's talk about how do you apply this to getting higher grades. We're gonna break this into 3 pieces. So let's start with fact-based right and wrong modular type stuff. The simplest way and most effective way to do this is to generate questions to ask yourself and attempt to answer those questions. You'll get very clear feedback on whether you know it or not. Is it right or wrong? For those of you who watch some of my other videos, you may recognize this as active recall. And that's where basically you go through a chapter or your notes or whatever it is, and you generate a list of questions. So instead of making notes saying the definition of economics is blah, 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 what you do is you create a question. What is the definition of economics? What is the formula for GDP? And then you attempt to answer it. I really like the app Notion in order to do this, because what you can do is you create a toggle that hides the answer until you choose to open it. So you can ask yourself the question, try and answer it yourself, and then open up the answer to see if you got it right. What you do then is, once you've gone through this, did I get it right or wrong, is you put a check mark or an X beside the answer or beside the question, depending on whether you got it right or wrong. Now here's where we're going into the specifically focused on what you got wrong. You've gone through a chapter, you made all the list of all the questions and the answers that are hidden with talk. The next day, you go through and ask yourself those questions, see which ones you get right, which ones you get wrong. The next day, you go back and do that same thing, but only for the questions that you got wrong. And that way, we're focusing our time only on the things you don't know as well. You're gonna gradually have fewer and fewer, obviously, as time passes. For essays and exam prep and stuff like that, it's not quite as obvious how to get the feedback, but you can get really effective feedback if you plan ahead a little bit. So what does this mean? So first off, you'll have heard me say, if you've watched other of my videos, research, writing, and editing are 3 different processes, 3 different things you're doing. You should be doing them at 3 different times. And this is where it's actually really effective getting the feedback. So do the research, prepare an outline in reasonable detail of what you're gonna write about, but take that, let's say we're talking about essays or papers, and I'll get to exams in half a second. Take that and go meet your prof during office hours and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. This is the direction I'm going to go with this paper. Does this kind of make sense to you? Or are there sort of very obvious things you think, well, you're kind of missing this? I'd love to get some of your feedback on it. That way you're not saying to them, well, here's my essay, go grade it and give me a chance to fix everything. You're saying, this is kind of what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? You get a couple of really good things coming from this. One, you get feedback from the person who's grading your paper. The second thing you get, which is really valuable, is the advice that that person will give you. If you implement it, there's a psychological factor, right? If I say to someone, I think you should go do this, and then they go do it, I'm favorably disposed to them. So that's probably going to help your grade out a little bit as well. This sort of applies to exams as well, especially if you prep properly and you give yourself a little bit of lead time. You can go and talk to the prof about the general direction, the focus you're doing in terms of where you're spending your time, and ask them if they think that makes sense, or maybe there's other things that you should be thinking about it, because there can be a reasonable body of knowledge. So that's how you get feedback on essays and exams and things like that. Very quickly now, we're going to shift to bigger picture, conceptual type stuff. So let's say you're trying to learn how to build a DCF model, a discounted cash flow model. There's multiple steps to it, and it's not really so modular. It doesn't lend itself so much to right or wrong answers. This is where you employ the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman was a physicist and a professor, I think it was at MIT, and he was known as the great explainer. And his gift was the ability to explain complicated topics in very simple language. The way we can apply this is you partner up with some friends and you explain that concept to them. You explain to them what are the steps in building a discounted cash flow model as simple a way as you possibly can. And the trick here is don't let yourself fall into the trap of using like industry jargon where you can kind of pretend you know what you're talking about even if you don't. Be very honest with yourself and have them be very honest with you. That's a way you can get feedback and use good feedback for more conceptual topics. Let's move on now to improving your job search results. There's a couple of different aspects to this. The biggest by far is to improve using feedback to improve your interview performance. So we are so fortunate that we live in a world with smartphones, tablets, and things like that we can easily record ourselves. You will be amazed how many people, yourself potentially included, who have verbal tics. Things like that. And for me, my one is I use the word so an awful lot. And over time, I've noticed that, and I've tried to reduce the frequency of it by watching myself. And that's what you're gonna do. You're gonna record yourself answering certain interview questions. And then what you do is you watch it and you notice the things that you're doing wrong and you improve on it. And then you record yourself again and start to improve on not just those very basic things like not using verbal tics, but modulating your voice, changing your intonation, changing your pacing, all of those things. You don't have to do it all at once, but you can gradually really make a big difference. Okay, so that's part one for improving your interview skills and your career prospect. The next step is you get a friend of yours to conduct a mock interview with you. So you recorded the interview, you maybe ask your friend for feedback. I would be a little careful because not everyone really knows the right stuff that you want to do in interviews, but it's nice to get maybe another perspective on it. And then what you do is you take that recording to your career services department, the staff there, and say, can you give me feedback on this? Because they will have seen a lot of interviews, they will have coached a lot of people doing interviews, and they will likely have some feedback for you, not only on your style and presentation, but probably on the content of the answers as well. So that's another way that you can get feedback. That's a very effective one for interview skills. In my view, I'm very mixed on asking people during an informational interview, how are my interview skills? You ought to know if they're good or bad at that point. And I think that it diminishes you somewhat. If you want, one of the ways that you can do it is say, if I were to be interviewing, so now let's say we're in September, and you say, well, I'd like to be targeting these jobs. What are the things that I can be doing between now and say January when the interviews come around, or February? What are the things that I can be doing that will make me a stronger candidate? Because they may be able to say things like, I've noticed that your academics are good, you come across very effectively, but there's not as many examples of leadership that I've seen. So maybe what you can do is seek out opportunities like that. That's incredibly valuable information. So again, a way to get feedback that'll help bolster your resume. So let's wrap up with how to use feedback to get promoted faster. The first thing I'm going to mention to you is my absolute favorite. It is ask yourself, in the job I'm in right now, what does amazing look like? If I were to be describing someone else who was absolutely fantastic at this job, what would I say about them? What would I say are the things they're doing? And then once you identify those things, then go and do them. Go and be amazing at that job. And in this way, you're basically giving yourself feedback. You're providing that feedback for yourself by thinking about it in a way that most people don't. So that's number one. The second thing I would say is getting feedback from your boss. Now, it's important to be judicious about this. You don't want to do it too often because otherwise you're just going to come across as annoying. But what you can do is not right away, maybe a year or so into the job, say, I do have higher ambitions. I would like to sort of, take on greater responsibilities. Are there things that you can think of right now that I'm not doing that I need to be doing, or I need to demonstrate in order to be able to take on greater responsibility? And usually people are pretty happy when someone has the initiative to, one, have that conversation, but two, that has the desire to do better and do more and succeed. And that's generally pretty well received. So these are some of the ways that you can use high quality feedback in order to be able to get higher grades, improve your job search results, and get promoted faster. One quick thing before I wrap, I recently launched a newsletter. The purpose of it is to give you a short read, less than 10 minutes, that gives you an actionable idea that you can implement right away to help improve your results and grades, help improve your job search skills, getting promoted faster, all of these things, being more productive. So it's got that one idea. It has 2 to 3 of the biggest news items through the week. You need to keep up on news, but you're so busy. This is part of one of the ways I can try and help you do that. And then finally, some of the most valuable content I've come across on Twitter and on the internet in recent days. I think it's really valuable. I think it'll help you out a lot. Sign up in the description below. Otherwise, hopefully you found this helpful. If you like this video, I think you're gonna really like this one over here, so make sure you go and check it out. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you again soon.